Alright guys, in one of our previous videos, we talked about some basic things that anybody can do to any of their cars to make a little more power. Today we're going to get into one in specific, which is going to be air intakes, and specifically the in front of the throttle, or before the throttle body. So we're not going to talk about manifolds and we're not going to talk about throttle bodies, just the actual intake piping that goes between your filter and to your throttle body. So there's two basic kinds that you can get, which pretty much anybody should be able to get for any car. And the first one's going to be a cold air intake, and the second one is a short ram intake. So we're going to go over some pros and cons of both of those, and let you guys know our personal choices and why we chose them. So I guess let's start with the short ram.
Yeah, so the Grazy, you guys haven't seen it before, but it has a short ram in it, which simply means it is still in the engine bay for the most part. That's what most short rams are. They're inside the engine bay. It has a heat box around it most of the time, so it's just going to connect straight onto your throttle body, and it's going to be a short short pipe that runs straight to the cone filter.
1.5 feet, 2 feet,
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah. So it will suck in hotter air than a cold air intake. It'll give you more of a
Intake sound.
yeah, of an intake sound.
It's that whooshing sound when you kind of blip the throttle from under the hood.
If you have a stock airbox and go to a short ram, you'll definitely notice the difference. It'll start to whistle slightly from that, and then you can go into cold air.
All right, and then so for cold air intakes, they're going to vary from car to car exactly how they work, but basically what that does is it changes where you're actually grabbing your air from. So for me, I'm grabbing my air from right under the headlights at the grill. You can run them all the way down to the bottom of your bumper to get, pure front air. I get plenty of cold air just pushed in right behind the grill. It's behind the grill, but it is sucking outside air in. So it's going to be colder air. But what that's going to do is it's going to give you just faster revs and then a little tiny bit of top end. Not much at all for the E30. Some cars that come with restrictive airbox, it can give you up to, I would say, 10 to 12 horsepower at the most on a good day with a tune. But there are some downsides to the cold air intake. So if you have your cold air intake routed as low as possible, maybe like down to your brake coolers or to the bottom of your bumper, and you live in an area where it rains or has lots of puddles or mud, you can actually soak up water. I wouldn't be worried about hydro locking your engine unless you were like going through floods, but you don't want water in your intake. It's not something that's good for the car. And then your filters will get a lot dirtier because instead of maybe there's like a truck in front of you and they blow a whole bunch of dust over your car, instead of it just going over your car and getting your car dirty, it's actually going to go into the intake and then the filter is going to catch it. So that's going to make your filter dirtier. You're going to have to clean it often, replace it more often, so on and so forth.
Yeah, but you will get colder air.
Colder air, slightly more power.
Which will have more oxygen in it, which will create more power, usually.
Yeah.
It depends from car to car. Now with the short ram, I guess a pro would be it sounds nicer than a cold air because the cold air just has such a long pipe that you're not going to get nearly as of an intake sound with it. The short ram does offer you, you'll usually get 1 to 3 horsepower. It's nothing crazy. The reason you really want to go short ram is just because you want that sound. Like I said, also depends on the car. Then you have the cons that are definitely you're still taking the hot air in under your hood. Yeah, a heat shield and it still being, let's say, where your stock airbox is located is going to be somewhere of a colder area under your engine bay, but it's still not out of it, so that still means you're going to get hot air. Yeah.
One thing with the Grazy is it does actually have a hood vent right where the intake is. So even though it is still in the engine bay and potentially grabbing a little hot air, it's actually getting air from the top of the hood. So it makes a lot of sense with that car. One pro to a longer intake, such as a cold air intake for newer cars, is that you have what's called, most newer cars have an airflow meter, which is 2 or 3 wires depending on your car, and the air flows over those wires and it gets a reading of how much oxygen's in them. So you want that air to be flowing in there as smooth as possible. So if you have an intake with lots of curves in it, that air is going to be turbulent and it's not going to get a proper reading. So if you replace it with a cold air intake that has smoother bends and longer straights, it's going to be less turbulent air. Your airflow meter is going to get a better reading, and then it's going to more aggressively tune your car. I know that's really popular in E46 M3s to do that, to put a nice big long straight pipe there, and people are seeing like maybe 5 horsepower gains and then throttle response. For me, I have an AFM instead of a mass airflow meter, and that is specifically a barn door kind. So as the air goes in, the barn door opens up, it throws more gas into the curb. So I'm not actually getting reading sensor signals from it. It's just saying how much air. It can't determine if the air is more dense or less dense like newer cars can. So I'm not getting the most out of my cold air intake, but it's better than a short ram, where my first E30 came with a short ram, and my second E30 I came with a stock air box, where the stock air box actually functioned better than the short ram that was on the other car. It could have been other things too because it wasn't the same car, but as far as I could tell, it performed better. And then when I switched it over to the cold air intake, I definitely didn't lose anything. I gained a tiny bit of top end, and overall it's just a little bit nicer to drive, and it still makes a little whistle. You can't really hear it over my exhaust though.
Yeah. Another thing, a pro to the short ram is that it usually, if you just take your stock air box off and everything and throw that on, it will not throw an air code for like a check engine. Because when you usually switch out your intake, if you throw a cold air, it will throw a check engine light, just because the air is just coming in a different velocity.
And so it doesn't know what to do with it.
So if you don't have an OBD2 scanner that you just plug in to clear it, then you might want to go get one of those before you do a cold air intake. But if you're doing a short ram, you should be fine.
Yeah, and OBD2 scanners, you don't need to get a super expensive one. I
have the $150 one.
Yeah, he went hard and got the
second best one.
Yeah, the other ones are Bluetooth and stuff like that. You really don't need that unless you're throwing codes all the time, or your sensor's in a really inconvenient spot and you don't want to have to mess with it again. So I've used the Bosch one in 2 different cars. We used it in a Honda and it worked flawlessly. And then I've actually also used the $30 Harbor Freight one in the Volvo. And the only thing is the wire's cheaper, so it frays out easier. But if you're careful, it works all the same.
Yeah, so...
short ram versus cold air. Real quick recap. Colder air from the cold air. Potentially more power and better revs. Cons are going to be sucking up mud and water, dirtier filters, having to clean and replace them more often, and potentially throwing a check engine light.
Yeah. Pros to the short ram, more of a beefy intake sound, no air code for your engine. Also, slight power gains, you'll get throttle response for sure. Cons, you'll be still sucking in hotter air from under the engine bay.
That's basically it for the short ram. So you kind of take those out, weigh them out for what's right for you guys, and then you can hopefully this will help you pull the trigger on the right intake system for your car, depending on where you live and what car you drive.
Yeah. So if you guys liked the video, like and subscribe. We'll catch you guys in the next one.
See you later.